Welcome, everyone, to another edition of SCRC's Let's Talk Caregiving. I'm your host, Roberto Velasquez, President and CEO of SCRC, and I'm here as always with my co host, Marta Rañón, our Executive Vice President. Hi, Marta.
Hey Roberto.
Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Paula Desplats. Dr. Desplats received her doctorate from the University of Mar del Plata in Argentina and moved her work to California to study more about neurodegeneration. Since moving to California, she has worked at UCSD to study and expand her knowledge on Parkinson's and Alzheimer's pathology. Dr. Desplats joined the faculty of neurosciences in 2009 and began doing research on Parkinson's disease. Currently, she is researching the role of circadian alterations that trigger neuronal death in Alzheimer's disease. Wow, what a mouthful. Welcome, Dr. Desplats.
Welcome, Roberto and Martha, and thank you very much for the invitation. I'm pleased to be here. Dr. Desplats, I am so excited to have you here and really talk to you about your research and all the exciting things that you've been discovering. Because I think a lot of the caregivers that we talk to, a lot of the caregivers that come to us, always find out what is the leading research driven medicine. How can they get involved? And so I think this is a good opportunity for you to give us those updates, but maybe if there are opportunities for them to help with this research. I know that San Diego here is at the cutting edge of really trying to find the cure and trying to find the treatment that works for families who are facing Alzheimer's and different types of dementia. So I guess my question to you is, what is it that you're working on? That's an excellent question. And I think the first thing we can share is that Alzheimer's disease is a very, very complex disorder. So while we usually tend to describe the disorder based on what we see in the brain, that is this accumulation of what we call senile plaques, that is the aggregation of a protein that is called amyloid. There is a lot more going on in the brain, and many years and the entire field across the world keeps working in trying to find what else we need to take care of to really ameliorate the disease, prevent it, resolve it, change the pace at which it progresses. So in all that big picture, my lab has been studying a very molecular part of this mechanism, that is how the genes that have all the information that our cells need to function will be expressed or regulated. And we have been looking for many options and many mechanisms, but there is one that particularly caught our attention, and that is what we call the circadian clock. And the clock is this fantastic biological mechanism that we all have and all the species have to make us entrain or be synchronized with our environment. So it's this system that tell our cells and our brains that is night and it's time to sleep, or that is down and we should be prepared for receiving food and digest it, or put our muscles and cell in movement so we can go on with all our functions. And in the recent years, there was a lot of more studies and really more attention placed to the system, because anytime we disrupt our circadian regulation, we trigger diseases. And we have been learning this more and more in the past years. And we now know that, for example, jet lag after a lot of travel can cause inflammation and diseases. The shift work, so nurses, firefighters, policemen that work at night, and that having an increased risk for other metabolic disorders, because we are completely shifting the ways in our bodies and the timing. So it seems like, and it's true that the time when things happen has a very important impact in the cell function. So it's not the same eating at noon that eating at midnight. So as we recognize more and more of these mechanisms, we started to incorporate these to neurodegeneration.
So you're telling me that when families are facing the issue of their loved ones or the people that they're caring for, where they wake up in the middle of the night and they just kind of wander, the whole sundowning, that is definitely connected to what it is that you're looking at in terms of studying and research. How interesting is that?
That's exactly the point, Marta. And that's one of the reasons why we incorporated the circadian analysis into Alzheimer's disease. 80% of the patients with Alzheimer's suffer from severe circadian dysregulation. And the way we see it is exactly what you point at. And caregivers are unfortunately so familiar with this, right? This sleep disruption and this wandering around, patients being more sleepy during the day, but activated or agitated at night. And we call that sundowning. And it's such a phenomenon associated with the time of day that is really telling us that it's the circadian clock misfunctioning.
We often hear from family caregivers and a lot of professionals teach that grazing throughout the day with the person with Alzheimer's, the term grazing, where they put food out and snacks, is actually encouraged throughout the night, including at nursing homes and assisted living communities, because there's a lot of weight loss that goes along with Alzheimer's disease, especially as the disease progresses. So I'm just curious how that, if you take that into consideration when you're working with families. I know in your studies you're looking at early stage or mild cognitive disorder, which maybe hasn't had those major disruptions, or the patient with Alzheimer's has not experienced so much weight loss yet, because the disease is very, very mild or very early on in the progression. But that's something that we're always teaching people, is it's okay to leave foods out and trinkets here and things for them to eat throughout the day. How does that, is that counter to your study in any way?
That's also an excellent question. And let me go a little back because we have to differentiate two things here, right? When you have a patient that is sundowning, that is wandering and is agitated, at that point it's like you need to put the fire out, right? So maybe stimulating with something to fiddle, with a snack to eat, you get kind of the extra benefit of saying, okay, and also consume a little more calories. But what we are trying to test is whether we can reduce the amount of this sundowning by trying to fix this clock a little bit. So, what we did in our laboratory, we use animal models of disease. These are mice that now carry the gene that produces protein that accumulates in the brain. So, these are our mouse that have Alzheimer's in a way. So, what we try, we study them and we found that they also have this fragmented sleep. They just have fragmentation throughout the day, throughout their naps. They are more agitated. So we thought this is a good model to study specifically this particular thing. So when we went to the brain, and what we do is my fantastic students and lab personnel will come every 6 hours to collect these animals. So we come at 2 a.m., we come at 8 a.m. It's kind of a long work. And we found a lot of the regulation in how the brain is expressing these genes that should come at certain times of the day. And that was broken when we look in these animals. But one very important thing is like the field has considered that these circadian issues are part of the disease progression and has taken this, okay, this is another symptom. What we found in the lab is this happens very early when there is a little accumulation of amyloid in the brain. And this is very good news in a sense, because that means that this potentially is contributing to disease. So if we can help fixing this clock, we might get less of these symptoms. So The other good thing is like the clock, since it's prepared to interact with the environment, can be entrained by different things. And what we use exactly is the time of meals or in the animal, the access to food. So usually when we have these animals in our vivarium, they have food all the time. They can eat whenever they want. So what we did, we changed that. We put a little lever in their food, in the food containers, so they only have access to their food for certain hours of the day that coincides with the moment they are active. So for us, we'll be eating during the day. And the animals start showing us some benefits. One thing is they were no longer agitated and they started sleeping better to a point that now they look like normal, healthy animals. So that was the first indication that this could be working. But also metabolically, we found better regulation of glucose. That, as you know, patients have issues with the insulin and glucose regulation. That was normalized by the diet. And the most important thing is like when we opened the brains, we found less pathology. There was less plaques, fewer accumulation. The neurons look better. There is less inflammation. And the most important finding for us is that cognition was rescued, and these animals remember better the traits and how to navigate a maze. So, this is why we were so excited with this idea of the circadian regulation.
You know, Dr. Desplats, I'm laughing because I'm always telling my family, let me sleep, let me sleep. Don't wake me up early. But I know that there is a lot of research right now surrounding sleep and sleep hygiene and the
Mm-hmm.
need to sleep
Mm-hmm.
proper number of hours.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know as a former caregiver, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners out there, that's always a challenge with people who have Alzheimer's or some sort of dementia, where individuals may not be as active during the day, but then at night, that's when they become active. So we tell them, hey, do exercise with them, take them out for a walk, do something while they're sitting. And that way they get exercise, but they also get tired. And so by the time that it's, time to go to sleep, then they can sleep fully or at least a longer period of time. So I think there is some truth to the fact that we need to be aware of the times and kind of follow our natural rhythm, which is, the circadian rhythm that you're talking about. But I think that as caregivers, we often push those boundaries, push those limits, right? Let me just clean the kitchen. Let me do a lot of laundry. And then we become tired and then we become groggy and then we're not good caregivers because we're sleep deprived. I'm sure there's a
Mm-hmm.
direct correlation to that.
Martha, I'm glad you bring this up because I was going to just start jumping in on that side of it is from the caregiver's perspective, you're so overwhelmed, 24/7, many people with very little help, taking time for yourself to even make adjustments so that you're sleeping well, that you're not as stressed. You mentioned earlier, Paula, about the types of jobs that create, stress. And well, a caregiver in a very similar way is really high stress, and therefore their cortisone levels are out the door probably, and it's really difficult, I think, for a lot of families to take a step back and do that healthy living, practice that good sleep hygiene for themselves,
Mm-hmm.
eat, exercise on a regular basis.
I wanted to ask you because I know part of your study and the research that you're conducting also includes the caregiver. And of course, everything we do is from the lens of the caregiver. But I'm really curious as to how does that role fit into the research? Because I know there's a lot of focus on the person with the dementia or Alzheimer's, for example, but the caregiver is also involved and is someone that you are taking into account. So can you talk a little bit more about that? I am really interested to find out more.
Yes, definitely. And I will kind of go back a little bit so I can cover all your comments. And yes, sleep is fundamental. And it took us as health scientists in all the breed of that term to realize how important it is. And we have been neglecting sleep in our life forever. And I recently heard a talk from a sleep scientist, and he started with something that I found fantastic and said, if you are busy, you will never think, okay, I will stop breathing now because I'm very busy and I will breathe in a few hours. And that's what we do with sleep. But sleep is as fundamental for us, for all the organism too. And if we go now into the brain dimension, what happens when we sleep? One thing that happens is that there is a decrease in the neuronal connections. We need our cells to rest. But there is something that is even more important for what we are talking today, that is neurodegeneration. When we sleep, there is a circulatory system in our brain that is called the lymphatic system. Those those circulating mechanisms and those careers will open and will start cleaning. It's the moment when our cells take the trash out for this system to clean up our brains. And there are very scary studies that if you, even a young adult that is healthy, stop sleeping or start sleeping irregularly, less than 5 hours for more than 6 days, we can detect an increase of these proteins that accumulate in the brain already in the serum, in the blood. So the impact is tremendous, and it has been not recognized until recently. Now, more and more doctors will talk to you about sleep because we recognize and understand how fundamental it is. So that brings us to the caregiver dimension, right? And that is true. And I always, when people ask me about doctors, I will always say that the best doctor for you is the one that, as a caregiver, takes the moment after examining the patient to talk to you and say, how are you doing? What are you
Mhm.
doing to cope with this? Because not only we see, and unfortunately I talk in first person because my family was touched by the disease too. Not only we cope with the emotional wreckage of seeing this person transforming in our eyes and losing their essence in some points, but then we're coping with the exhaustion and trying to fulfill our usual roles or life or work if you are still active working, and then being sleep deprived and following day being up to take care of a person. So it is something very pervasive that affect both the patient and the caregiver.
Mhm.
And thanks for sharing that. And I know that when Martha puts together her educational programs out in the community, one of the main things that we talk about is self-care, having balance in your life, good nutrition, good diet, sleep. Martha, you talk about that a lot. Martha and I also have conversations on the side about sleep deprivation and how that can impact you, even in just your mood, for the day. But long
Mhm.
term, there are studies showing now that can cause some more serious health problems. I think it's really important for family caregivers to understand that this is so important for them to have that kind of healthier type of living, if they can. If they can't, like you said, just because you're real busy right now doesn't mean you can say I'm going to stop breathing. Like, that's an analogy that to me just kind of just brings it home. You shouldn't, just because you're overworked or stressed, just stop sleeping or reduce the number of hours, especially for long periods of time. What a wonderful message sending it out, Marta.
Paula, so I'm sure we can talk about this for hours, but I also wanted to bring this point up that with family caregivers, there's we talk about resources, we talk about support and network. What do you recommend for family caregivers in terms of maybe becoming involved with studies like yours, or how can they help the process along, since all of us want to get rid of this disease, but there's not a lot that we can do sometimes. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yes, thank you for this opportunity then. So, what we are doing now, we're very excited because we are bringing these results to the patients. And in collaboration with the UCSD Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, we are doing a first clinical study. And what we are investigating really is if we prolong the fasting period at night, meaning that you stop eating around 8 p.m. and then don't have breakfast until 10 a.m., that is you can take your coffee, but with certain limitations on the sugar, for example, and seeing how that impacts the symptoms and some biomarkers. And the first thing we want to see if it's this feasible, if patients with dementia can really adapt and tolerate this absence of food during the night. But the important thing is like we are inviting the caregivers to join actively in the study. So you do the same fasting. And this is something, it's a topic that is around so much. It's a lot of hype with intermittent fasting. This is not a diet for us. The goal is not losing weight. The goal is
Mhm.
adjusting your metabolism and your clock, and potentially the caregivers might see benefits in sleep. We don't know. We really need to study this. So we are inviting the caregivers to be partners in science with us. And we really value all the work and what they can help us understand about the disease. So we are recruiting for this study, and we are trying to make this as fun as a positive experience. It's really not a big burden. You use just an active watch for 3 weeks so we can measure your sleep. You just record when you eat and when you stop eating. We will be doing phone calls, supporting people around to try to stick to this. So this might be also, maybe some caregivers hear about the time restricted eating and the benefits and didn't know how to start implementing that with their patients. So we are here for supporting that. So I think they can have the information through your wonderful site, and we are very excited in what we will learn about this and how we can support both sides of the equation equally, the patients and the caregivers.
Well, I love
Yeah,
your term partners in science. So thank you so much for all this great information, Paula.
yeah, thank you. When individuals volunteer to participate in studies like this, it's just like the biggest volunteerism gift you can have. And again, encourage families to look into this at the Shiley Marcos Alzheimer's Disease and Research Center, or we'll help disseminate this information because really great studies. And again, it's not saying there's a cure or anything, but it definitely a good study, and it brings hope, that there might be some links that we can continue to explore that might have some treatment, some remedy for Alzheimer's in the future. And this is how you get started with these types of very important studies that go on.
Yeah, thank you. And one thing, so this is an exciting moment in science because the first medicines are out there and more should come soon. Our approach might be complementary, might be helping how you navigate what could be a drug to cure. But for us, what is very important is that different to the drugs, these are really available to everybody. It's a behavioral modification that can have an impact.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Well, that's all the time we have left for this edition of Let's Talk Caregiving. To hear more of our podcasts, follow us on your favorite podcasting platform or visit our website at scrc.care. I want to thank Martha for co hosting another important discussion, and our guest, Dr. Paula Desplats, and our audience for tuning in. If you're providing support to a loved one, you don't have to do this alone. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. To connect to our programs and services, visit our website at scrc.care or call us at 1 800 827 1008. If you live outside of San Diego and Imperial counties, visit caregivercalifornia.org to get connected to the Caregiver Resource Center nearest you. To support our efforts and make a tax-deductible donation, please go to scrc.care and click on the Donate tab. And remember, SCRC is here for you,
caring for those who care for others.